So you went and got yourself a law degree. Congratulations, and welcome to the Happy Lawyer Project. As usual, I'm your host, Akoma Ronu, and I created this show to teach lawyers how to work in their gift and live their passions. Together with my guest, we provide the knowledge, insight, skills, inspiration, and encouragement that you need to find your happy. On today's cast, I chat with CFP Katie Brewer from Your Richest Life about money. And if you know me, you know how much I love to chat money. I know that anxiety about money, and student loans in particular, are a real issue for most young lawyers. So I'm super excited to have a credentialed money expert on the show. Let's get to it. Welcome, Katie Brewer. I'm so excited to have a real professional to talk money with today. How are you doing this morning?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you so much for agreeing to be on. I was really excited to finally get the opportunity to talk to someone who could talk money with me, because I know for so many lawyers, money becomes this huge obstacle towards them being able to think more freely about their options as far as their jobs and their lives. So I'm really excited to dive in and talk to you about student loans particularly, but kind of everything that goes with money and lawyering.
Yeah, everybody loves student loans, right? Right?
You would think based on how many there are.
Yeah, but I feel like this is a topic that comes up quite a bit in the law community, because people are like, well, how do I get out from under these things that are kind of following me around? They're like a balloon that follows me everywhere.
So yeah, exactly. And like right up front, are you the person who thinks that it should be the priority, or do you take a more nuanced stance that if you can afford to pay them, you should just stick with them for the long haul? Do you have like a general view, or is it really case by case?
You know what's funny is that I really go case by case, because I find for some people, and I will include myself in this, for some people, they just hate having debt. They hate having it hanging over them. And so for them, even if they have a student loan at 3%, and we know darn well they could get a better interest rate somewhere else, they're going to feel better once they've gotten rid of it. So I fall in that camp as well. But I have other clients who are like, well, I could throw extra money towards that, or I could get my company match in the 401k and, be rocking maybe a 7 to 9% return. For those people, we might put student loans on the back end, maybe pay a little bit extra towards them, but not a whole bunch. So I kind of tend to go by how people feel about their student loans, and then by the interest rate. I mean, obviously, if one's at 12%, like, we're not just going to ignore that student loan and hope it goes away.
That makes sense. And I definitely was one who fell in the pay it all off camp, because when I got out of law school, my rates were up in the 8.75 range.
Oh, congratulations. You got one of the highest rates.
Yay.
Yay.
You're a winner.
Exactly.
So I definitely was in that camp. I remember that I was getting my taxes done for me for a lot of weird reasons. I was like traveling a lot. So the firm was doing my taxes for me because I had been out of the country. And the accountant at EY, was asking me how much interest I had paid the previous year. And I was like, 40,000. She was like, no, just the interest that you paid. I was like,
oh man,
40,000. She was like, will you just send me the payment? I was like, I'm not lying to you. I have a lot of student loans with a really high interest. It didn't end up really mattering because my salary was so high as a starting lawyer that I didn't qualify for the credit. But I just remember that conversation and being like, that is a lot of money. And so that's when I started.
Sad. Yeah. That's sad when you're like, I could buy a pretty nice car for what I'm paying just in interest on my student loan.
Oh my gosh, it's so depressing. And I don't think most people know. But I would be interested in knowing if you have a number where you think, one, if that interest rate is low enough, you can start talking about holding off on paying it off. And two, kind of like along with that, what's the spread you would need to get? Because obviously if your interest rate is like 4% and you could be getting 5% in the market, maybe that's not worth the effort. I don't know. Is that how you think about it?
It is. But then, I've kind of got the gray area as being probably between like 4 to 6% on whether people want to throw extra money towards it or put money elsewhere. So that's where, if somebody's got a preference one way or the other. But, if your loans are at like 2%, I still have some people that are like, I still want them paid off. And I'm like, okay, I mean, even your car loan's higher than this, but whatever, we'll start throwing towards them. But when people have stuff that's at 7 or 8%, The good part is you can maybe sometimes write off the student loan interest, but the bad part is most attorneys that are working for big firms make too much money to write that off. Wah, wah, wah.
Yeah, I know. The people who need it. It's a kind of a hard situation because I say people who quote unquote need it, but like maybe we don't need it. And just it feels like I need that write off because of the size of that interest.
Right. And it would be nice. You're paying it. Sure. And it technically is something that qualifies for, a deduction, but just not if you make too much money.
Yeah. Well, especially in my case where it was like a Department of Education, like it was a government loan, a federal loan. So like, It just felt like, how come the banks get better rates than I get? Like, I was doing something to help myself. I feel like the government should be supporting that. But I know there's a lot of conversation around that right now in the political climate.
Yeah. Yep. Well, and I mean, part of it, if you think from the other side, this is a big loan where there's not anything that they can take away from you really to get the payment. So like any other loans, like a mortgage, they could take your house away. If it's a car loan, they can come repossess your car. But if it's a student loan, I mean, there are a lot of people, unfortunately, out there that just stop paying them and they can't really, show up and come take your house and your car all that easily. So that's why they tend to have a little bit higher rates on them. I mean, it's not fair necessarily, but that's kind of why, because it's an unsecured loan.
That makes sense. I hadn't ever really thought about that, but that totally makes sense. And in light of the large number of student loans out there and the high rates people were getting, it wasn't surprising that a lot of refinancing companies started to pop up in the last kind of 6 to 8 years. Is that timeline? I don't know if that's right, but I feel like that's when I started to learn about them.
Yeah. It used to be where if you consolidated your student loans back in the day, I'm going to age myself. I'm like, way back in my day when I got out of college, a lot of times you could consolidate and refinance all at the same time. And the rates were really pretty low back then. So I remember my husband had a couple of student loans and we did that with his, consolidated and refinanced. And I think he locked in like a 2.5% interest rate or something. Jeez. At some point, they kind of changed the rules where now you can consolidate and make it easier for yourself to pay. If you've got 4 different loan providers, it can get messy to keep track of everything. So if you consolidate, it puts it all with one loan provider, but your interest rate is really just the average of those 4 interest rates and weighted for the amount that you had with them. And sometimes you'll get like a little discount for putting it on auto pay. But usually if you want to refinance, you have to do that through like a private company now. It's not necessarily something you can do through the federal government anymore. Oh,
and interesting. I didn't know that. So I knew about consolidating, but I didn't know refinancing wasn't an option at all.
It used to be. Sorry for everybody who went to school in the last 10 to 15 years.
Lucky us. We keep winning. We keep winning in the student loan game. So when you think about refinancing, I guess what should people be taking into consideration? Who is it right for? And when should people be thinking about doing it?
Yeah. So if you have really good credit, it might be something that you consider. If your credit is looking not so great because maybe you went on a couple too many vacations back in college, stuck it on credit cards, and you're still trying to pay down that balance, then refinancing might not be all that great because a lot of times the rates go by your credit history and your credit score. So a lot of times the best rates are available for people who have a good established credit history and a good credit score. It doesn't mean you shouldn't look into it, but usually I find that, if somebody's at like a 7.5% interest rate, they might be able to get 5.5 from refinancing if they have a good credit score. But if they don't, a lot of companies will just deny the application. Kind of the same thing, like they don't have to refinance and they don't have any collateral from which to penalize you if you don't pay. So they're kind of going by the, we need to know that somebody has a good history of repayment to pay back.
So in the case of, one of the things that I know is taken into consideration is debt to income ratio. And so for a lot of lawyers who are making 6 figures, but also have 6 figures of debt that far surpasses the 6 figures they're making, do you think it makes sense to refinance early or wait until your income is higher than your debt? Does that matter? Should you refinance more than once?
Yeah, well, I always tell people that you're not really going to know until you kind of go through the application process. Mm-hmm. And even then, I've had a couple of clients where we've done it and they got denied, and it didn't make any sense on why they got denied. And so we kind of fought it. And when they looked back into it, they were like, this has happened twice now. With one of the cases, whenever the company looked back into it, they were like, oh, you went to this college? We thought you went to this other college, and that one wasn't on our list of ones we can accept. And so, oh yeah, actually it is approved. I was like, okay, well, guess that was worth our, extra hour or so of research into it. But yeah, I mean, there's a couple different companies out there, and they can kind of give you a rough estimate if you go onto their websites and kind of put in your credit score and your estimate of, your income and your debt payments right now. But until you actually do the application, which by the way, that does count as pulling from your credit history. So that is a credit inquiry. So you don't want to do like 10 of them. Like if you've got 2 companies and you narrow it down, like just do the application with 1 or 2. Like don't go apply for 10 different companies. But then, you'll kind of get your offer of what the interest rate would be and then go from there.
That makes sense. I definitely was somebody who was very skeptical when I first refinanced because I didn't really know what I was getting myself into. And I actually went with a fixed rate. I guess it was, 4 years ago now, and then refinanced to a floating rate a year ago because interest rates have been so low that I kind of wish I'd gone with the floating rate 3 years ago because back then I would have gotten something like 1.5.
Yeah.
And I just was not sure because everyone has been saying forever that interest rates are going up. Interest rates are going up. They have to go up. And they haven't really.
Yeah, that's always in the news, isn't it? What are you going to do when interest rates go up? And it's like, I've actually been the media has been talking about this for 3 years now.
So what are your thoughts? Fixed or floating in the year 2017?
Yeah, well, it once again depends on level of risk and what your contract says. So if you have a floating interest rate, you need to know what the cap is on that rate.
Very good point.
Because if it's a floating interest rate and your cap is like whatever the standard interest rate plus 10, I don't think you probably want that on a variable rate. If rates went up to 5 and your cap is that plus 10, your cap is 15%, like that's a horrible interest rate. But on the other hand, if it's like, whatever the standard interest rate is plus 2 or something like that, then your cap isn't, your cap would be reasonable. So I always tend to go with whatever is reasonable at that time. I have put people a lot on fixed rate payments just because I've seen that people get all excited about really low rates. And then if the rate goes up and if their payment goes up, they weren't really ready for that. Yeah. So I kind of tend to put people on fixed interest rates unless, they kind of understand that, you're getting 3% right now for variable interest rate, but it could go up to 8%. And if so, your payments would go up. Like, are you equipped to handle that? And if they're already paying a bunch extra towards their student loans anyways, they probably can handle that. But if they're just paying the minimum, they probably can't. And we better stick with a fixed rate.
That makes sense. And I think that's really just very good advice for lawyers who are generally very risk averse.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think they would have heart palpitations every time because every time I get the email, I have heart palpitations where it's like, your interest rate has changed. And I'm like, oh no.
Yeah, exactly.
What's my payment?
Yeah. Well, just know that like, if you're looking into rates, I mean, it's going to be just like a bank that's advertising mortgage rates. I just pulled up some where it says like interest rates range from 2.23 to 8.97. Just assume you're not probably going to get 2.23. And if you do, it's because it's on a 5-year payoff with a variable rate and you have like an 800 credit score. So I would not plan for whatever they advertise as their lowest rate. It's probably going to be towards whatever the higher rate is, maybe minus 0.5% or 1%, just to set expectations for like what your interest rate might actually be if you apply for refinancing.
That's a great tip. So let's move on from student loans. And I want to know what your thoughts are on people who are in a situation where they are making a nice salary, but they do have this huge student loan debt. And they want to know whether they should be participating in the 401k, how much they should be putting in an emergency fund, because it does feel like this debt should take up all their money.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they do have disposable income because they have the salary that is pretty large. So how do you think about dividing up your income and your disposable income?
Yeah. Well, before I jump into that, I did want to make one little disclaimer on the student loan refinancing because, I'm a financial planner and we like to put our little disclosures at the bottom.
We're lawyers. We understand disclaimers.
Exactly. Yeah. We put a little one. You guys have like 2 or 3 pages of disclosures, but just make sure that you read the terms of the company that you're refinancing with, just because federal loans do come with some protections. Like if you lose your job, there's a set amount of time that you can put your student loan on hold. Just make sure that whatever company you're refinancing with has similar terms, just because you don't want to find yourself in a situation where you get laid off, but you're still having to make a payment that you committed to without having any income. So that's my only little disclaimer, is just make sure that the terms of the loan, because it's going to be a private loan once you refinance it, are something that you can live with.
Do you have any recommendations for companies that have better policies than others?
I know, there's a couple of big ones out there, but SoFi, Common Bond, Earnest, and then there's some private banks and stuff that have them as well. But I believe that SoFi has like a standard kind of policy for if you get laid off, and you've got to read your contract because they might change at any time. But if you get laid off, then you can put it on hold for a certain amount of time. And they have like something like a career coaching program where they try to help you find another job. And I think Common Bond has something that's similar to that as well. I'm not sure on the rest of them. Those are things where you just want to make sure that, if you got laid off, that you're not going to get harassing calls or get your loans like sent over to credit collection agency.
Absolutely. There could be nothing more terrifying than losing your job and being in a collection agency.
Right. Exactly. All right. Well, so yeah, on the whole, like balancing out student loan payment and paying that down with savings and stuff like that. It's funny because I usually find that people think of it as like 2 different payoffs, kind of like, do I save more or do I pay off more towards debt? But there's really the third variable, which people sometimes choose to ignore, which is your lifestyle and what you're doing over there. So if you're 5 years out and you're still kind of have upgraded your lifestyle a little bit, but you waited to buy an expensive house, you kind of still are driving your crappy jalopy car from law school. Like if you're still doing that, then the amount that you have in the other 2 buckets, savings versus loan payoff, is going to be way more than if you do, I don't want to stereotype, but kind of the standard lawyer thing where you're like, woohoo, I'm making a good salary. So I'm going to go purchase a really nice house. And then we're going to put a pool in the back. And I need a new car. And my spouse needs a new car. And, we just had kids. And so now we have them in private school. Once you do that, you kind of lock yourself into having less money in those other 2 buckets to be able to work with. So I did want to point out that there's actually 3 buckets there that you can kind of choose from. And I've seen some instances where people have kind of said, okay, I'm making a commitment that I'm going to wait, 3 years to make a lifestyle upgrade. And I'm going to really attack my student loan debt and be able to put some money away. And they've been able to make like huge progress doing that. In fact, you probably did that because you were able to kind of throw a bunch of money at your student loans.
Oh, absolutely. It was definitely a conscious choice on our part. And I was targeting getting my student loans below my salary so that I could refinance at the best rate possible. And then that way I got my rates under 4%. And so now I've kind of given myself some breathing room.
Right. Exactly. Yep. Yeah. So if you kind of cut back on lifestyle a little bit or make a conscious effort to not upgrade lifestyle, that really helps with having the 2, more money to put towards those 2 buckets. But if you're just looking at, for instance, I have $1,000 per month. Should I put it towards extra student loan payment or should I put it towards something else? I always tell people that emergency savings is so boring, but it's so something that if you don't have anything in there and your emergency savings in your head is like, oh, if something happens, I've just got a line of credit or I've got my credit card, like build that up first before you start putting extra towards anything. Like 3 months of salary or 3 months of take home, I would say is a good starting point. And then once you get there, you can kind of divide it up. So that goes by the whole like, What is your interest rate on your student loan? Do you have matching money in your retirement plan? Because if you can put in 4% in your retirement plan and you get 4%, you just got 100% on your money. Like you're not going to get that kind of interest rate anywhere, so
absolutely
should probably be getting the matching.
And I'm just going to say this, that a lot of law firms don't have matching, and I know that some do. So for those of the listeners whose law firms have it, definitely take advantage of it because you are in a rare situation.
Lucky you. You've got one of the few law firms that have matching.
Exactly.
But even with just tax stuff, I mean, sometimes it helps to be able to, just kind of funnel that $18,000 away as pre-tax money into the 401k because it kind of comes right off the top. So if you're making $200,000, you can kind of stick $18,000 into the pre-tax 401k. You only get a W-2 for $182,000. So that's all that you have to pay taxes on. So I hate to say like it depends, but it really depends.
Yeah, that's always the answer. I know. As lawyers, we also know the it depends answer.
Right.
I wanted to touch on something you were saying about lifestyle upgrades because I think that there's also this mindset amongst lawyers sometimes because you work so hard and you've worked so hard to get to where you are that you feel like you deserve to spend the money on the fancy vacations and the big dinners and the nights out. And I don't know if that's something you've dealt with your clients and kind of working them through that and kind of being more intentional. Because there's nothing wrong with taking nice vacations and going out to nice dinners, but kind of doing it in a way that is in alignment with what you actually want to be doing so that you don't regret it and kind of have shopper's remorse the day after and wish you hadn't spent the $300 going out, a night on the town with the Uber X or whatever. With surge charging and
yeah, well, I always tell people I like to kind of go through an exercise where we kind of list out fixed expenses, and a lot of times those are what they are unless you take action to do something different on them. But then with variable expenses, I always like it when people kind of list out like their 3 top variable expenses. So for example, if I were to list out mine, it would be I like going on vacation, usually out of the country, once a year. So that is like my top. If I have to cut everything else, darn it, I will at least go down to Cancun with all of probably the 18-year-olds that are there. With my cheap, I finally got, out of the country vacation. But for some people, that might be different. For some people, that might be they have committed to helping a family member. For some people, that might be like giving back to an organization or to a church. And I tell them like any of those are fine. Just make sure that you identify what your top 3 are that are most important and then work everything else around it. So if it's really important to you to be able to go out to like really nice dinners that you pay for your friends, that's fine. But just make sure that that takes the priority and that the rest of your spending kind of falls in line with like you've got to cut back somewhere else, as opposed to if you have 10 things that you're just throwing money at every month, it doesn't really work all that well because your money just leaks out of your bank account.
Yeah, I like the idea of 3. I like it's like a clean number and you can keep track of 3 things, because even with 10, it would be hard to really know how to divide your money amongst 10 things, even if you could afford it.
Yeah. Well, let's do the exercise. So what's your top 3 things that you like to spend money on?
My top 3?
Yeah.
Is travel, food, and probably my kids.
Yeah.
Not necessarily in that order because my kids are pretty expensive.
You're like, whatever, and the kids somewhere in there.
I don't feel bad about, spending on my kids' education, spending on childcare. We love our nanny. I never feel bad about those expenses and they're pretty high up there. So I should feel good about them.
Yeah. And I would say, and I'm not even sure I qualify this as variable expense, but at some point when I started my own business, I had to make a decision on whether my daughter started kindergarten this year. So I had to make a decision on whether I was going to pick her up from school at 3:00 or whether I was going to pay for after school care. And I remember wrestling with this and being like, oh gosh, it's going to be extra money and we're going to need that, blah, blah, blah. And I had a friend of mine who is an attorney actually said, is this an investment in your business that you would be willing to make? Because that's going to give you an extra 3 hours every day. And in a time where probably a lot of people want to meet because it's later in the afternoon or it's after their work. And I was like, yeah, it is one that I want to make. So just things like that, where if you, kind of think about the bigger picture. I'm throwing $260 a month towards after school care, where I can pick her up early if I want to, but that does give me the flexibility to be able to work a little bit more during the day. So I kind of consider that to be one of my top ones, vacations to be top ones. And shopping, although I'm a total cheapskate and I go to Target and buy all of the, like designer rip-off shoes. Don't judge me when you see me.
I mean, Target is like, I can't go into Target.
I know. I have to have a list if I go into Target. It's like, these are the only things that you are here to buy.
Does that work? I can't. Target's the only place where that does not work for me.
Or I take my child with me because somehow the 6-year-old whining about how we've been there for 10 minutes with mommy trying on shoes somehow limits the amount of time that I have to spend money there.
Absolutely. That would work. I actually really, really love the phraseology, I don't know if that's a word, of this is an investment in your business. I was just still thinking about what you're saying, because often people think of if this is something I want to spend money on. But if you think of things as investments and what the return is, I think that switch in mindset is really interesting. So like when you're booking a vacation, it's like an investment in your, self-care, in yourself. And is it an investment you'd want to make?
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's really important. I think it's also important sometimes to run it by somebody else. I don't know if that's a family member or if you have a financial planner, or I'd say your spouse, but sometimes spouses don't keep each other accountable. It's the weirdest thing. But just make sure that if you've got this investment in yourself, that you kind of go back to like, okay, does this fit into my top 3? If it's yoga, like I have some clients that, they drop between like $1,200 to $1,800 a year on yoga. And, if I were just to be like, oh, well, obviously we can cut this out. But if that's in their top 3, because that allows them to relax and not go crazy, working crazy hours, then we're going to work everything else around that.
That's great. I would love to transition a little now into how people should plan differently if they're worried about losing or quitting or burning out of their big salaried job. Because I know that's a concern for a lot of lawyers that I talk to who want to just pay off their loans really quickly because they're afraid that they're going to lose their job or burn out, or they want to save a lot of money and not pay off their loans because of the same reason. So what are your thoughts on if your trajectory isn't that kind of typical upward trajectory?
Yeah. And, I hate to get into gender issues, but for a lot of women, we're not all that excited about through childbearing and child rearing years continuing to do 80 to 90 hour per hour weeks. We can get a whole discussion of leaning forward, leaning backward, whatever. But I've had a lot of friends, colleagues, and clients where, sometimes at some point they have a really nice salaried job at a law firm, but then they decide to go start their own company. And they're essentially starting from scratch, from nothing. Like they're going to be making negative money for the first 2 years. But it's a lifestyle thing where eventually they want to be able to have a decent income, but be more in control of their lifestyle. So I would say that all goes back to the keeping your fixed expenses low and not getting into the trap of having them accidentally increase. So I call it accidental lifestyle inflation, where all of a sudden you look and you're like, oh my gosh, I used to be able to live off of, $3,000 per month. And now it takes our household $15,000 per month to live off of. So anything where you can kind of sock money away for later, especially if starting a business is in your path at some point, like you're not only going to want your emergency savings for personal purposes, but you're also going to want kind of some business startup capital to be able to throw towards a business. So, all of that is just kind of committing to what your future is going to look like and making sure you don't get sucked into the right now and that you've got a whole bunch of extra money right now.
So I've talked to a number of transition coaches, and some people have said have a year of buffer. Some people have said had 2 years of buffer. Do you have a number that you like to throw out there for people if they're thinking about starting a business or just, taking some time off?
Yeah. I mean, I tell people essentially 3 months, I feel like is the bare minimum. And I tend to say of take home pay because I've worked with people 11 years now, and No offense to everybody out there, but we all lie to ourselves about how much it actually costs us to live off of a month. So, you can't really lie about like how much actually hits your checking account every month. That's a number that is not negotiable. It is what it is. So 3 months of take-home pay is kind of the bare minimum. 6 months of take-home pay is better. And it kind of depends on if you're married or not. So if you have two spouses that are married that don't work in the same industry or don't work at the same firm, then probably 6 months of take-home pay is good. If one of them is going to go start up a business, you might want to have a separate kind of like starting up a business fund. And in that, you might want to have like 1 year or so of income, 1 to 2 years even. I know whenever I started my business, I thought it was going to take X amount, which was $10,000. And it did actually, but then my business bank account would have been down to like, $300. And that was not something I was comfortable with. So kind of went through round 2 of funding, which I say funding, that was just me taking money out of my emergency savings that was extra and putting it in there. But there are always things like that where you not only have a reduced income, but you've also got business expenses that you have to pay for a while. So yeah, I would say transition coaches are probably good with saying 1 to 2 years if you're thinking about starting a business.
Fantastic. I would love now for you to talk a little bit about what you do, because I know that a lot of people who have big salaries are wondering about whether they should be working with a financial planner, but since they have a negative net worth, whether it makes sense, whether they should wait until they actually have money. Can you talk a little bit about your services and kind of who you work with and when you think it's the right time for people to reach out?
Yeah. So I am a certified financial planner. I'm also a fee-only planner. So there's a couple different ways that financial planners can get paid. It just makes it confusing. And especially probably for the law community, because you can't practice law unless you have gone through law school and you passed the bar. So when lawyers look at financial planning, and you've got some people that have like a sales license and some people that have just an insurance license and some people that have a certified financial planner designation and some that don't. Lawyers are like, what the heck? Why is there such a hodgepodge of people that can work in the financial services industry? But, just to break it down quickly on compensation, you have financial advisors or financial planners that get paid by commission only. This used to be a popular way to do it, but I'm seeing less and less of this. Like even financial advisors that work for like an insurance company, a lot of times they'll get an additional license that allows them to charge for financial plans. So the second way that they can be compensated is by fees and commissions. That can be called commission-based, but the new marketing term for it is fee-based. So if you have a fee-based advisor or a fee-based financial planner, then that planner can essentially charge for a financial plan, but then they can kind of switch hats and they can sell products as well. So if there's insurance that needs to be put into place, they can sell that insurance, to get it in place. A lot of times those will be fiduciaries. So that's another term that gets thrown around a lot in the financial services industry. But it's kind of weird because the advising part or the financial planning part of what they do is under the fiduciary rule. Sometimes the product part of it is not. This all might be changing in the next year or two because there's a bunch of stuff that's going through Congress right now. And then you've got fee-only financial planners. There are not that many of us. I would say it's less than 10%. And I'd actually venture to say it's probably less than 5% of people that are in financial services. And fee-only planners either charge by percentage of assets that they manage, or they charge on a project basis or an hourly basis or a retainer basis. So even within that, there can be different ways. But essentially, they'll do the advising. They might do the investment management. And for me particularly, I do a lot of coordination of insurance and a lot of coordination of estate planning. I just don't get paid for it anymore. So it's like, I'm still telling them exactly the type of insurance they need, setting up the review, making sure that it gets in place. I just, at the end of the day, don't get a check from it that, is like, oh, here's 50% of the first year's premium. So that's kind of the difference on how financial planners get paid. And that was not succinct at all.
It's fine. Well, that's how convoluted it is. So it's hard to do it succinctly.
Yeah, exactly. It is a little bit convoluted. With the clients that I work with, I actually started my own practice because I wanted to be working with Gen X and Gen Y clients. So that's usually people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, some in their 50s, just because I felt like in fee-only planning, there was not really anybody who was wanting to do that. There's more now, but back then, 2 years ago, there was like nobody. Most fee-only planners have a pretty high asset minimum. A firm that I used to work for now has $1 million that you have to hand over to them. So like not in, company restricted stock. We're talking about like it's available to be managed by that company.
Yeah.
So I worked there and it was a great experience and everything, but like none of my peers were working with them because they didn't have $1 million from previous employers and saved up that they could hand over to somebody to manage. So a lot of times I'll work with people on, essentially some of the basics, like establishing an emergency savings, figuring out a debt payoff plan. But then a lot of times we get into like, I've got goal 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and I'm trying to figure out how to juggle all of those and not go crazy and not have to live on beans for the next 5 years. So a lot of times that's what we're looking at. Like, how can you buy the house that you want to buy, but then also make sure you don't get into too many fixed expenses while paying off the $300,000 of student loans that you have from going through professional school and saving for retirement and maybe being able to, save up for kids' college at the same time. So those are things that I work on with my clients. And I always tell them, like, this is not something where I have like an amazing answer and I'm not a magician. So sometimes that might be like, we're going to work on this first. And then as soon as that gets funded or paid off, then you're going to have all kinds of extra money and we're going to move to this goal next. But just having that roadmap allows people to kind of see how it's going to fit together and allows them to kind of commit to actually doing it.
I think the accountability piece is so huge. And so even if you have a negative net worth, you might get a good return on the investment to engage somebody who can help you pay that off in a systematic way.
Right. And I know I do run into that quite a bit. So sometimes, I'll tell people it doesn't have to be all or nothing with a financial planner. There's always different financial planners that are fee only that might do a project with you. So essentially a project for an attorney might be like, hey, help me figure out if I should refinance my loans or not. And if I have this much to work with every month, how I should prioritize that. And if you're just looking for like a couple of answers that will get you pointed in the right direction, then that might be good for you, and then you can kind of work on it for a year or two. And then you kind of jump more into comprehensive financial planning. So I feel like people always, say, oh gosh, I got to either like completely commit or not. And there are some financial planners, myself included, that, if I have the time to give, then I will take on a couple of projects per month to kind of give people that quick start on their finances.
What would be the best way for someone to find a fee-based, more flexible financial planner?
A fee-only financial planner.
See,
it's all confusing.
I'm already confusing the terms.
There are a couple different ways. So I'm in a network of fee-only financial planners that work specifically with Gen X and Gen Y. So it's called XY Planning Network. Their website is xyplanningnetwork.com. That's really convenient because a lot of the financial planners in there, well, they're already vetted out that to be listed on the website, they have to be certified financial planners already. So that takes care of the education component. They have to be fee only, not fee based. So that takes care of the, I don't know how they're getting paid part of it. And with the CFP, you have to have 3 years of experience to even be able to use the credential. So that takes care of, they've been in the industry for more than like 3 months. And then if you go on there, you can kind of filter based on specialty, or if you want somebody that's close to you, you can do that. I know that I work with some people in Texas, which is where I live, but I also have clients across the country. And some of them really like that because, they might transition a couple times in their career and they don't have to change financial planners every time that they do that because we're already set up working virtually. So we can kind of continue to work together even if they move from Texas to Arizona to New York.
That's great.
So I would say that's the first place I would recommend. NAFPA, NAFPA, NAFPA.org is a bigger organization of fee-only financial planners. I do always warn people, though, that you might have to talk to 5 different financial planners and be prepared that some of them will say, like, I have an asset minimum or I have, a fee minimum, and it might be over what you're wanting to pay. So, but that's always an option as well if you want to kind of broaden the scope out of the fee-only planners that you're looking at.
Awesome.
Just be prepared. Yeah. Don't cry too much if you get 3 no's, because it can be kind of deflating if you're like all gung-ho about doing it and you're like, well, I can't find somebody that'll actually work with me. That's why it might be good to start with looking at xyplanningnetwork.com.
Yeah.
And then
that's a great network. And that's where I found you, actually. So
yay.
I
was one of the first people in there. They were like, hey, would you start your firm if, we kind of figured out a lot of the details and provided resources? And I was like, yep, I've been waiting for somebody to do that. Thanks.
Oh, fantastic. That's so great. Yeah, I will put the links to both those sites on the show notes so people can access that through the website. But before we finish up, I just wanted to ask you a quick question. What do you think is the difference between people who are able to find happiness and those who struggle and remain unhappy?
So the question is, what is the difference between the two?
Yeah.
Well, I feel like some of it is knowing where you're going and why you're doing what you're doing. Some of it is kind of aligning your work and your life with your values. And some of it's mindset, honestly. So if you're somebody who chooses to look at stuff as an opportunity or this is a stepping stone or whatnot, I've seen people in very similar situations where one of them might say, like, I can't believe that I'm in this drudgery every day. And the other person is like, I know where I'm going and I eventually want to be here. And I know that this is giving me the training and the tools to get there. And I feel confident in what I'm going to be doing in my future. So some of it's kind of figuring out what your values are and making sure that you're living your life and using your money and working in something that aligns with your values, or subsidize. I mean, you can always go volunteer your time if you got it, or give to charities that you're passionate about to kind of fill in that heart piece. And then, kind of the attitude. So if you need to go sign up for yoga at $1,200 per year, I give you permission to do that. Just make sure that you cut it out from somewhere else in your budget.
I swear I didn't tell her to say any of that. I literally, I would say the exact same thing. It's about being in alignment with your values and mindset.
Yeah, we didn't even coordinate on that.
Fantastic. So thank you so much, Katie. What's the best way for people to follow you and learn more about what you do?
Yeah, so my website is yourrichestlifeplanning.com. yourrichestlifeplanning.com. If you don't want to type all that out, you can also get there by going to yrlplanning.com. I've got a blog on there that has a whole bunch of articles that are free. You don't have to sign up for anything. So I've got one on there actually about choosing the best financial planner for you. And if it's okay, I'll shoot you over the link. And if you want to include in show notes, you can. Or you can find me on Twitter. It's at Katie, KATIEYRL. So at KatieYRL.
Great. Thank you so much. I will include all of that information in the show notes. It was such a pleasure. Thank you again for coming on today.
Yeah, thanks. It was fun. Have a good one.
You too. Thank you for joining me for the Happy Lawyer Project podcast. Please head over to my website, www.thehappylawyerproject.com, for more information from today's show. While you're there, I'd love it if you'd leave me your thoughts on the show. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn, Facebook, or follow me on Instagram. If you've enjoyed the show, please share it with your friends. And don't forget to head over to iTunes to subscribe and review the show. As you know, each rating helps more listeners find the show and helps me get awesome guests on here for you guys. If there's anyone you'd like me to have on the show, or if you'd like to be on the show, head over to my website and let me know, or send me an email at Okoma, OKEOMA, at thehappylawyerproject.com. A special thanks to everyone who's left a review, sent me an email, or reached out to me in any way. I appreciate you. Thank you again for spending this time with me, and if you would like to learn more about working in your gift and living your passion, head over to the website for a free gift. Until next time, bye.